If you have seen my previous video about LUDMILLA, I pretty much already covered all of the important things that you need to know about this character. So instead of going over the same things again, I'll be focusing more on the potential questions that you may have and also go over some talking points that I haven't had the chance to dive deep into in the last video. You have a pretty good selection of characters when it comes to LUDMILLA's team composition, but first, let's talk about Blanc and Noir versus Naga and Tia. These combinations are what most people are going to gravitate towards, but they each have their own pros and cons, so let's go over each one of them to see which combination is going to be the best for you. So Blanc and Noir is generally going to be good, and also your safest option, simply because their utility is not dependent on anything specific. You are always going to get the same damage increase, reload ammo, and also a respectable amount of healing. I recommend using this if you have a lower investment LUDMILLA because the reload effect from Noir's second ability is going to help LUDMILLA get close to infinite ammo. So now you might be thinking, if Blanc and Noir only has a good synergy with LUDMILLA, then that means that Naga and Tia are going to be the best option, right? Well, yes and no. Yes, LUDMILLA is going to deal more damage in a team with Naga and Tia, but that is assuming that your enemy has an exposed core. So think of enemies like Blacksmith. But aside from that, the reason why I say no is because even though LUDMILLA is going to perform really well in this team, it doesn't really make sense for you to use her with Naga and Tia if you have top tier characters like Alice and Red Hood. The combination of Naga and Tia is so good that you would want them to be reserved for the best characters in your roster. If you are doing solo content like pushing the campaign or the tribe tower, then this is not going to be an issue. But in the context of solo and union raids, where you are trying to optimize your damage output, then I wouldn't really recommend using them with LUDMILLA, not unless LUDMILLA Winter Owner is your best DPS, or this team composition is your only option. And since we're talking about raids, let's actually go over the raid boss team composition that I recommend using, and also talk about some things that you need to keep in mind when coming up with your own team compositions for LUDMILLA. For this one, we are going to eliminate Blanc, Noir, Naga, and Tia because I'll be assuming that you have the top tier DPS characters that will essentially be glued to those team compositions. Chatterbox is weak against water, so having more water code characters in your team is going to be great. So knowing that, a really good option for a burst 1 unit is going to be Dorothy. She is a water code NIKKE, she has cooldown reduction, and she is also going to increase damage to enemy parts, which is really good for machine gun units like LUDMILLA Winter Owner. As for the burst type 2 character, you can be very flexible with this, but generally speaking, if you have a lower investment team composition, and you can't simply deal with the boss mechanics without taking a ton of damage, then you have to use a healer like Marchana, or at least have a tank like Diesel. Diesel is honestly a pretty good pick for LUDMILLA, because Diesel can often reload her ammo. She can also take a good amount of damage for your team, so you don't have to worry about not having a healer all that much. You can also consider using Senti for her shields to counter the jumping attack from Chatterbox. You can use Novel or basically any other burst type 2 damage amplifier for more damage, but only if you can survive the full duration of the stage without needing some sort of protection or healing. As for the other 2 slots, you can pretty much choose your preferred burst type 3 DPS or use a single burst type 3. But a specific character that actually works really well is none other than Privity. LUDMILLA is going to deal most of her damage during full burst, so Privity's attack buff is going to be perfectly in sync with that. Additionally, if you have high investments on both LUDMILLA's burst and Privity's skill 1, then she is pretty much going to have an instant reload. We are going to talk about how you would want to build LUDMILLA in a later section, but basically, you are aiming to reduce the downtime on her normal attacks as much as possible. If you can make it so that she never has to reload, or she is getting so much reload speed that she doesn't even look like she's reloading, then that is going to be the best case scenario. So to summarize this section, for specific content where you don't need a lot of teams, your best team for Winter LUDMILLA is going to be a team with Naga and Tia, a top tier burst 1 unit like Litter, Volume, or Dorothy, and then your best DPS character available. But for types of content where you need multiple teams, your best support units are better off being used with the best of the best DPS. So my recommendation would be a variation of Dorothy, Privity, and another off-burst buffer like Maxwell. Not every single player is going to have all the characters that I mentioned, so you are more than welcome to use the next best option that you have. So moving on, let's actually talk about how you would want to build LUDMILLA Winter Owner, and also talk about some tips on how to optimize her damage. First up, focus on upgrading her gloves and headpiece as it gives the most attack. And then after that, you can also upgrade her chest piece. The chest piece is not going to increase her attack significantly, but every single bit of attack is going to help. As for the modification effects, generally, you would want to go for attack percent, but for LUDMILLA Winter Owner, getting a few lines of increased ammo capacity is going to be the main priority. I would say that getting 3 lines of ammo increase with a decent percentage is going to be good, but you can also get away with only 2 if you happen to get high values on each roll. This is something that you have to feel out in your specific team composition because her stat requirements depend on what team you are using. For when you are using her in a team with Litter and Noir, you're not going to need as many lines of ammo increase, so you have room for more damage amplifying stats. If you are mainly going to use her in a team without any reload effects, then you are going to need at least 2 high rolls or 3 decent rolls of ammo increase. And then attack percent and elemental damage is going to be your next priority. If you're still not sure which team you're going to use, or you don't want to commit to a single team composition, then go for 3 lines of ammo increase so that you always have enough to help you get close to infinite ammo. For Harmony Cubes, Bastion is going to be your best option, especially if you have this at level 7 or above. But you can also go for Resilience if you have a heavily invested burst on LUDMILLA. My LUDMILLA Winter Owner has a maxed out burst, and so whenever I use a level 7 Resilience Cube, she actually reloads so fast that her weapon's attack speed doesn't completely reset. So if I'm using Privity, then she's going to have a 1 frame reload speed, and that means that you can also get a quick reload at the very end of your full burst rotation whenever LUDMILLA is the one activating full burst. When it comes to her skill upgrades, your end goal is going to be a fully maxed out skill 1 and burst, with her burst ability being the main priority. Getting her burst to level 10 is obviously going to be really strong, but this can also be very expensive. So a good stopping point will be at level 7. That is going to give LUDMILLA enough reload speed to the point where she is not going to lose a ton of firing rate on her weapon whenever she reloads. Her skill 1 is a really good ability for obvious reasons, so you would want to get as many levels in this as possible. It's going to increase your whole team's damage output, it provides decent passive damage in itself, and this will basically act like another Bastion cube because of the reload ammo effect. Her second skill is not relevant at all because the passive damage has poor scaling and the critical rate buff is not that good. You can leave this at level 4 and spend your upgrade materials on a different character. The one thing that you always need to do is pay attention to the 20-second reload speed buff that comes from her burst. Sometimes your rotations are not going to be as fast as you want it to be, so there will actually be a pretty long time of LUDMILLA not having her reload speed buff. So what I recommend is reloading her weapon the second before the reload speed buff expires. The reload speed is going to snapshot, so even if you reload when the buff only has 0.1 seconds left, LUDMILLA is still going to reload at the same speed even if the buff already expired. You can see the buff duration below the character icon, and the reload speed buff is going to be the one with the magazine icon. If you want to be more precise with the timing on this, you can keep track of when you pop her burst, and you can also pause the game and check the character details to see how long you still have on the reload speed buff. Of course, you don't have to reload if you still have a ton of ammo, let's say around 200, but this is still going to be important to keep in mind so that you are minimizing the amount of time you have to spend reloading her weapon. So overall, LUDMILLA Winter Owner is a really good DPS, and she is the type of DPS that we needed for a very long time. Before we got LUDMILLA Winter Owner, we didn't really have a top tier water code DPS, so she is going to be a great pickup, especially when you're up against fire code enemies. The only downside for this character is that she is pretty expensive to build. You are not going to see her max potential if you don't have the required levels on the Harmony Cubes, skill upgrades, and proper stats on her modification effects. But if you are able to meet those requirements, then she is going to be a monster for single target stages.